I think once upon a time it would have been it's sort of somewhat amorphous to talk about happiness. Lots of people had lots of different theories about happiness, about what makes you happy. Some people would have sort of said, oh, religion or spirituality or something. Other people would have said, no, money, sex, fame, power, love. There are all these different theories about, potentially what makes us happy. But what's somewhat interesting is that since about 1998, 1999, science has actually become fascinated with the subject. Traditionally, National Institute of Health funded research into pathologies and neuroses, things like depression, schizophrenia, anxiety, things like that. And since the 1950s, they've made enormous strides in finding out what causes misery and how can we treat certain aspects of misery. But until about 2000, there had been no research into happiness, no scientific interest in happiness. Some people say the father of the research was a guy called Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who was a psychologist who actually wasn't researching happiness at the time. He was researching the psychology of peak performance, about what happens in people's minds when they are performing at their absolute best. So he was looking at whether it was musicians or sports people or even people in public speaking or actors on a stage. When people are absolutely at their best, what is the psychology? What is the mental aspect that allows them to perform at their best? And he wrote this huge best-selling book called Flow, all about this state. When we can get into this mental state of flow, it seems to be when we are performing at our best. And very approximately, you can summarize this theory that when our skill level exactly matches the difficulty, it requires such total focus that all the other sort of aspects of our mind go away. And so we are completely focused. And that allows us to perform at our peak. Now, it's very difficult to get your skill level to exactly match the difficulty, because usually either something's too easy, in which case it's boring and we lose focus. It's too hard, in which case we get anxious because we have this sense that we're going to fail. The other aspect of it is that nothing stays stationary, is that over time, our skill level increases. If we keep doing something over and over, we get better at it. So then, in order to get back to that state, we have to increase the difficulty level. And that's sometimes difficult to do. So it's difficult to get to this state of flow, but anyway, his analysis was around peak performance. But one of the things that everybody reported was that when they get into this state of flow, it's like there's a state of extreme happiness. Like there's almost a euphoria. Time disappears. All of your worries and anxieties disappear because you have to be so focused on the task at hand. And that somewhat was the starting point from which people like Martin Seligman then built his career really around the study of happiness. And then since then there have been thousands and thousands of studies. Another one of the big researchers is a guy called Daniel Gilbert. And I'll come back to him in a little bit later. But he wrote so Martin Seligman wrote books like Authentic Happiness, and then he updated it many years later with a book called Flourish. Daniel Gilbert has a great book called Stumbling Onto Happiness. Anyway, so there was all this research. And there are many aspects to happiness. Many, many, many aspects. And a lot of it's like psychology, so it's percentages. Like, well, X% of people who do X seem to be a bit happier than people who do Y or whatever. But part of it's extremely simple. Extremely simple. Which is that your happiness is largely dependent on what you're focused on. If you're focused on what's right with your life, all the things, all your blessings, all of the things that's good about your life, if you're focused on that, you're pretty happy. You're grateful, unhappy. And if you're focused on everything that's wrong with your life, you'll be miserable. That's it. So, end of class, we can go. So it is pretty much that simple, and we all know people who have had all sorts of terrible things happen to them, and yet they have this remarkable fortitude, or it appears like fortitude, whereby they have this ability to keep going and to stay positive. And I imagine we probably know people, sometimes ourselves, but we know other people for whom there are many, many wonderful things about their life, and yet they still find ways to be extremely miserable and unhappy. I always sort of think of, I remember being in San Francisco and being on this sort of meditation retreat and thinking, what a weird place to be. It was in a very affluent part of San Francisco. Because what made people miserable there was that they just got their BMW cleaned and then it rained. Like, just, the gods are against me, kind of thing. And so it doesn't matter what your status in life is, how rich you are, how well off you are, or anything else. You can find ways to be miserable if you wish, if you are focused on what's wrong with your life. Now, that's all well and good. That's nice research. The problem is, it's pretty useless. It's good to know, but nobody's actually telling anybody, how do you focus on what's right? Because it ain't simple. We know from meditation, it is not easy to place your mind in a certain place. Your mind wants to go wherever it wants to go. And if it wants to focus on the fact that, you just washed your BMW and it's raining, and you're a cursed person, then that's where your mind will go, or it's where it might go. But with meditation, we have this skill of, or we practice this skill of noticing where is our mind, and then we practice putting it somewhere else. So every single time you notice you've got distracted, and there's that temptation to go, damn it, why aren't I better at this meditation thing? Why do I keep getting distracted? Instead of that, just notice that every time you notice you've got distracted, you are strengthening that incredibly important skill of being able to notice where your mind is. And then you're practicing the second most important skill of putting it somewhere else, putting it back onto the breath. And meditation can sometimes feel frustrating. It's like, it doesn't matter how many times we do it, the mind still goes wherever it goes. But that's okay. Because what we're doing every time we do that is we practice noticing where it's gone and then bringing it back to the breath.